The waitress jabbed her hands towards the black tourist aggressively. "This place is not for you. Get out, and go back to Africa." As the words struck out, the room fell dead silent as everyone waited for Tyrone, the black man's response. What happened next left the entire diner speechless. As we delve into the story, if you stand against racism and prejudice, tell us where you're watching from, and click on the subscribe button now for more stories like this. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the small town known for its charming streets and cozy atmosphere. The downtown area, bustling with tourists, seemed to come alive at twilight. The local diner, an old but well-kept establishment, stood proudly at the corner. Inside, the murmur of voices and the smell of sizzling burgers and fries filled the air. The familiar hum of small-town life wrapped around every corner, the type of place where locals gathered to catch up over coffee and tourists found comfort in a warm, homemade meal. At a window seat near the back, Tyrone Jackson sat alone, casually scrolling through his phone. He was a black man in his early 30s, dressed in a simple yet stylish outfit, jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a jacket that looked like it had seen a few adventures. His deep brown eyes scanned the menu, taking in the local specialties. Tyrone had been looking forward to this trip for months, eager to explore the sights, taste the food, and experience what this small town had to offer. He had come alone, excited for a peaceful escape, and the diner seemed like the perfect spot to kick off his visit. As he waited for his meal, his fingers tapped rhythmically on the table, and a soft smile tugged at his lips. He felt like he could unwind here, away from the noise and chaos of city life. It wasn't long before Brandy, a young white waitress in her early 20s, approached his table. With her blonde hair tied back in a messy bun, a name tag that read, Brandy, gleaming under the dim lights, she offered him a forced smile. Her movements were swift but stiff, as though she were simply going through the motions of a routine she had performed 1,000 times before. "Hello there," Brandy said, her tone a bit too cheerful to be entirely genuine. "What can I get for you today?" Tyrone smiled back, trying to make the exchange as smooth as possible. "I'll start with the chicken fried steak and a sweet tea to drink. And if it's not too much trouble, could I get some extra hot sauce?" Brandy jotted down the order, nodding, but not quite making eye contact. "Sure thing. I'll get that right out for you," she replied before walking away quickly. Tyrone wasn't sure why, but something about the interaction left him with an odd feeling. He shrugged it off, thinking he was probably overthinking things. It was just a small-town diner, after all. But as he watched Brandy retreat behind the counter, he noticed her glance back at him, just a moment of eye contact that was quickly averted. He could feel the tension in the air, like he was being watched. But again, he dismissed it. Minutes passed, and Tyrone continued to enjoy the quiet hum of the diner. The place was busy, but not overcrowded, and the chatter of tourists and locals filled the space with a sense of warmth. As he stared out the window, he noticed a couple of older patrons laughing over their meals, a family of 4 seated at the next booth, and a few others scattered throughout. All in all, it was the kind of place that made him feel welcome. At least, that's how he'd hoped it would feel. Hours passed, and no food was in sight. Brandy and other waitress completely avoided him while attending to every new customer in the diner. Tyrone's curiosity was piqued, so he called onto Brandy to remind her that he hadn't been served. Then, the moment he had been hoping to avoid arrived. Brandy, clearly uncomfortable now, walked back over to his table. She didn't look at him as she approached, her gaze fixed on the counter in front of her. Tyrone looked on, giving her a polite smile, but there was something off about the way she moved this time. She was no longer the cheerful waitress who had taken his order. Now she seemed tensed, her every motion stiff. She reached his table, her lips curling into a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Apologies, but the seat you're on has been reserved for another valuable customer. We can't serve people like you." Tyrone blinked, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean by that?" he asked. Brandy nodded with a stern face. "Well, this diner serves only the elite and people worthy of class. Get out. Go back to Africa where you came from." She shouted, pointing at him aggressively. The air in the diner froze. Time seemed to stop as the words hung between them. Tyrone's heart skipped a beat, and he felt a sudden surge of anger. His initial shock was replaced by a quiet, burning resolve. The room fell into a dead silence as every single person in the diner stopped what they were doing. The laughter stopped. The clinking of silverware ceased. Every patron was now staring, but Tyrone didn't look at them. He didn't need to. He was too focused on Brandy. Her face remained blank, her eyes hard and defensive, as if she had said nothing wrong. But her words? Those words were poison. Tyrone's eyes narrowed, his breath steady but slow. He looked directly at her, then at the silent onlookers. The moment Brandy's words left her mouth, the room fell completely still. Tyrone didn't react right away, though the words stung deeply. He had heard racist comments before, but there was something about the way she said it that felt different. The calmness in her voice, the almost casual dismissal of his presence. It wasn't just ignorance, it was deliberate. But instead of reacting in anger, Tyrone simply looked at her, his gaze steady. Brandy stood there, her arms crossed, waiting for a response. She must have thought she had the upper hand, her eyes flashing with the smug confidence of someone who believed they were untouchable. But she didn't expect Tyrone's reaction. He took a deep breath, as if to collect himself. His hands didn't shake, his voice didn't rise in anger. He simply stood up from the booth slowly, deliberately, his movements calm and calculated. The tension in the air only grew, and the patrons around him watched in silence, unsure of what would happen next. Tyrone didn't raise his voice. He didn't shout. Instead, he looked her in the eye and spoke softly, but his words were sharp, each one cutting through the silence. "You think you can speak to me like that?" Tyrone's voice rang with authority, not anger, but the kind of quiet strength that demanded respect. "You think you can stand there and tell me to go back to my country when you don't even know me?" Brandy opened her mouth to respond, but Tyrone didn't give her a chance. "You're not the first person to try and tell me where I belong, but you're the first to say it so openly, so proudly. You've made your beliefs clear, and now, so have I. 2 years ago, I lost my wife in the evil hands of a racist cop who thought she didn't belong. I just lost my one and only daughter to cancer a few weeks ago, and I couldn't take life easily anymore. I decided to come to this town to unwind my sorrow and clear my head. And this is also what I get here." He paused, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment, before he turned his attention to the rest of the room. The other patrons were staring, some clearly uncomfortable, others unsure of what to do. The whole room was watching. Tyrone stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each breath, as he addressed them all, not just Brandy. "You all see this, don't you?" Tyrone's voice carried, calm but commanding. "You're all sitting there, staring, some of you probably agreeing with her, others too afraid to speak up. You think this is normal. You let it happen, day after day, to people like me. You all stand by, watching it happen, and then act surprised when someone speaks up." For a moment, it felt like Tyrone was speaking directly to each of them, the weight of his words sinking in, making every one of them question their own silence. He wasn't just confronting Brandy, he was confronting them all. But Brandy, still standing by the counter, was visibly unsettled now, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Tyrone to challenge her. Not so calmly, not with such quiet power. Her own insecurities were bubbling to the surface, and for the first time, she wasn't sure if she could hold her ground. Tyrone turned back to her, his gaze unwavering. You think because I'm a tourist, I don't belong here? You think you can decide who's welcome and who's not? He paused, his lips curling into a thin, controlled smile. Let me tell you something. It's not about where I'm from. It's about the kind of person you are. And right now, you're showing everyone exactly who you are. A few of the other patrons started to shift uncomfortably, glancing at one another, then back at Tyrone. One or two exchanged looks, as though silently agreeing with him. But no one spoke up, not yet. The silence was still heavy, thick with the realization that this wasn't just about a comment from a waitress. This was about something deeper. Brandy, her pride crumbling, snaps back, though her voice now carries none of the confidence it once had. I didn't mean it like that, she says, but there's no real conviction in her words. She's floundering. She's trying to regain control, but she's failing. She knows it, and so does everyone else. No, Tyrone interrupts, his voice clear, decisive. You don't get to take that back now. The damage is done. But I'm not going to stoop to your level. I'm going to show you that people like you don't get to control how others are treated. He looks around the room, his eyes landing on the patrons once again. This isn't just about me. This is about all of us, about how we allow this kind of behavior. You can sit there, remain silent, pretend it's not your problem. But this is all of our problem. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone's holding their breath, waiting for someone to do something, say something. And then, one by one, a few people begin to nod. Others simply stare at the floor, clearly uncomfortable, but at least they're no longer silent. Tyrone's words have had an impact. Brandy stands there, her face turning red, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. She can't escape the weight of the moment. She opens her mouth to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. Instead, she takes a step back, away from Tyrone, unable to meet his gaze any longer. Tyrone, still standing tall, takes a final look at her before turning toward the door. He pauses for a moment, taking a deep breath, then walks out of the diner. His stride is slow but resolute. He doesn't need to prove anything. He said his piece, and the rest is up to them. As the door swings closed behind him, the diner remains quiet for just a beat longer. Then a soft murmur starts to rise. A few patrons exchange looks, and then someone claps. Then another. The sound of applause begins to fill the room, quiet at first, then growing louder. Tyrone may have left, but his message had clearly landed. The diner remained eerily quiet even after Tyrone had left. His words still hung in the air like an echo that refused to fade. Some patrons sat in stunned silence, staring at their plates, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Brandy stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale, her breathing shallow. The shift in the room was undeniable. Everything had changed, and she knew it. Steve, the cook, stepped out of the kitchen again, wiping his hands on a towel. He looked around at the uncomfortable scene unfolding, and then let out a deep sigh. Well? His voice was rough, cutting through the silence. Ain't nobody got nothing to say now? The older woman who had spoken earlier glanced at Brandy, then at Steve. Her voice was firm but calm. That young man was right. We all sat here and let it happen. A middle-aged man near the window, one of the patrons who had spoken up after Tyrone's confrontation, nodded. It shouldn't have taken him calling us out to realize it. But he did. And now we have to ask ourselves why we let it get that far. Steve crossed his arms and turned to Brandy. And you? His voice was softer now, but there was no mistaking the weight behind his words. What do you have to say for yourself? Brandy couldn't look at him. She stared at the counter, her hands gripping the edges so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had always thought of herself as tough, unshaken by the world, but right now she felt exposed. Weak. Small. She had always been able to justify her actions in the past, to convince herself that she was just telling it like it is. But today, she saw herself through the eyes of everyone else in the room. She finally swallowed hard and whispered, "I don't know why I said it." Steve scoffed. "That's not an answer." Brandy shook her head, her throat tightening. She could feel the heat of everyone's stares on her, and it made her sick to her stomach. She had been so sure of herself when she spat those words at Tyrone. She thought she had power in that moment. But now, she felt like the lowest person in the room. Brandy let out a breath, her eyes brimming with shame. She felt something she hadn't expected: regret. The woman near the window sighed. "It's not enough to regret it, Brandy. You need to fix it. And not just because you got called out." Brandy finally looked up. Her eyes darted to the other patrons, then to Steve, then to the door Tyrone had walked out of. Her stomach twisted because she knew they were right. She had been exposed, not just to them, but to herself. And now she had two choices: pretend like nothing happened and keep living in ignorance, or change. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure what to do. By the next morning, the town had already heard the story. Tyrone's confrontation with Brandy had been recorded by a teenager sitting a few tables away, and the video had already gone viral overnight. The footage was everywhere. Social media, local news stations, even national blogs were picking it up. The title? Brandy's face was all over the internet. At first, she didn't realize it. She had turned off her phone after leaving work, wanting to shut out the world and pretend like it wasn't happening. But when she arrived at the diner for her next shift, everyone was staring. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Some customers wouldn't even make eye contact. Others watched her like a ticking time bomb. Steve didn't say a word when she walked past him. He just shook his head and went back to the grill. It wasn't until she finally checked her phone that her stomach dropped. Thousands of comments, messages, some raging at her for what she had said, others mocking her, some even threatening her. The video had millions of views. Everyone knew what she had done. And the worst part? The truth was right there for her to see. The video captured every second: her smug tone, Tyrone's calm response, the way the entire diner went silent. She saw herself through the eyes of the world, and for the first time, she realized how ugly she looked. Not physically, as a person. She had been so sure of herself when she told Tyrone to go back to Africa. Now, she wanted to disappear. Brandy barely made it through her shift. Every interaction felt like walking through fire. When she spoke to customers, they responded stiffly, keeping their conversations short and cold. The regulars who once laughed with her now avoided her entirely. By the time she clocked out, she felt exhausted in a way she never had before. But there was something she needed to do. She hesitated at first, her hands shaking as she scrolled through her phone. Tyrone's social media had been tagged in hundreds of posts, and it wasn't hard to find him. His account was filled with positive messages, people praising him for how he handled the situation. He hadn't called for hate, hadn't demanded she be punished. He had simply spoken the truth. Brandy took a deep breath and typed out a message. "I don't know if you'll even read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. Truly. What I said to you was wrong. I was ignorant, and I didn't realize how deeply words could hurt until now. I'm trying to understand, to change. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I regret it." She stared at the message for a long time before pressing send. She didn't know if he would reply. She didn't know if he would even care. But she knew that for the first time in her life, she was facing the truth. And she wasn't going to run from it anymore. A few hours later, as Brandy sat alone in her small apartment, her phone buzzed. Her heart jumped into her throat when she saw the notification. Tyrone had replied her with a text that read, "Acknowledging your mistake is the first step." But change doesn't happen in an apology. It happens in actions. Do better, Brandy. Prove to yourself and the people around you that you can be better than the person in that video. Brandy stared at the message, her throat tightening. For the first time since the incident, she felt hopeful. Weeks after the incident at the diner, the town had already begun to change. It was slow at first, subtle, like the quiet opening of a door that had been locked for years. But the more people talked, the more they revisited Tyrone's words, the way he handled Brandy's outburst, the calm authority in his voice, the way he called out everyone in the diner for their silence. The video of the confrontation had gone viral, but it wasn't just a fleeting moment in the digital space. The video resonated with thousands of people. It became a rallying cry for those who had faced similar discrimination. It wasn't just about a tourist in a diner anymore. It was a movement. The footage spread across social media platforms, sparking conversations in the comment sections, blogs, and news outlets. Tyrone's calm, measured response was now the talk of the town. But it wasn't just his town. The ripple effects were global. Within days, journalists from all over the country reached out to Tyrone. A prominent reporter from a national news station finally caught up with him for an interview, and the segment quickly gained attention. Tyrone spoke openly about his upbringing, how he had learned early on that silence in the face of racism was just as damaging as actively participating in it. He shared how no one ever warned him about the harsh realities of racism, how it was more subtle in some places, but always there, lurking beneath the surface. And then he spoke about Brandy, not with anger, but with understanding. The segment, titled "A Tourist's Calm Response to Racism Changes a Town," quickly went viral. Tyrone's words went beyond just the diner. They sparked debates in school classrooms, workplaces, and social media platforms. People started looking inward, questioning their own silence, their complicity, and how they could do better. People started taking action. Within a week, Tyrone was being interviewed by national outlets, from small podcasts to major TV networks, about how a single act of standing up against injustice could ripple through communities. As Tyrone's influence continued to grow, Brandy, having seen how far the video had traveled, couldn't avoid it anymore. She was everywhere, in blogs, in memes, and on social media. But it wasn't just her face that people recognized. It was her actions. She had become a symbol, not of racism itself, but of what happens when someone who has been part of the problem decides to change. One morning, Brandy logged into her social media account, expecting the usual slew of angry comments and memes, but what she didn't expect was the outpouring of support from complete strangers. People were messaging her, encouraging her to keep learning, to keep pushing forward. There were apologies from people she had known, both from the diner and outside of it. Some patrons who had witnessed the incident spoke publicly about how they had felt ashamed for staying silent, how Tyrone had opened their eyes. Still, Brandy didn't know how to feel. She had done the work. She had attended diversity training, learned from her mistakes, and volunteered at local events. But none of it felt like enough. She wanted to do more. She knew that, in her small way, she had to show others that change was possible. So, she posted a video on social media, one that would forever change the trajectory of her life. Brandy sat in front of her camera, trying to steady her breath. Her heart pounded as she hit the record button, but this time was different. This time, she wasn't looking for sympathy. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't looking to fix her image. She was facing the truth. "Hey everyone," Brandy started, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger with each word. "I'm Brandy, and I'm the waitress from that viral video with Tyrone. And I'm here to take full accountability for what I said. I've spent the last few months learning, reflecting, and trying to be better. What I said that day was disrespectful, ignorant, and hurtful." She paused, looking down at the table, feeling the weight of the truth. She had never felt so exposed. But I'm not here to apologize just because I got caught. I'm here to apologize because it was wrong. And I want to be better. Not just for myself, but for everyone I've affected. Her video went viral again, but this time it wasn't about her. Months had passed since the incident at the diner, but its impact still lingered in the town. Brandy had spent every day since that night trying to change, trying to prove to herself more than anyone that she wasn't the person people saw in that viral video. At first, it wasn't easy. People in town treated her differently. Some avoided her, others glared when they walked past her in the grocery store. The regulars at the diner no longer chatted with her like before. She had become a symbol of ignorance, and in a small town, reputations don't fade quickly. But Brandy refused to run from it. She enrolled in diversity workshops, spent nights reading books on racial history, and even started volunteering at a local cultural center. Helping organize events meant to promote unity. She wanted to understand, truly understand, why what she said was wrong, why it mattered. At first, people didn't believe she had changed. They thought she was doing it just to fix her image, to escape the shame. And maybe at the very beginning, that had been part of it. But the more she learned, the more she realized how blind she had been. One day, while cleaning tables after the lunch rush, Steve the cook sat across from her. He hadn't said much to her in months, but today his face was unreadable as he sipped his coffee. "I gotta admit," he muttered, studying her carefully, "I thought you'd quit after everything. Go somewhere else. Try to start fresh where nobody knew what you did." Brandy swallowed hard. "I thought about it," she admitted. "But running won't change who I was. If I left, I'd just be ignoring the problem. I had to stay and face it." Steve nodded, leaning back in his seat. He took another slow sip of coffee before saying, "You still got a long way to go, kid, but maybe, just maybe, you're getting there." His words meant more to her than she could explain. A week later, Brandy was serving tables like usual when the diner door swung open. She glanced up automatically, ready to greet the new customer. But the second she saw who it was, her stomach twisted. Tyrone. He walked in calmly, just as he had months ago, dressed in a simple, clean-cut outfit. He glanced around the diner, clearly recognizing it, and then his eyes landed on Brandy. Brandy froze. The last time she had seen him, she had been standing behind the counter, smug and ignorant, telling him he didn't belong here. And now she had no idea what to say. For a split second she wondered if he even remembered her. But of course he did. Tyrone didn't avoid her. Instead, he walked straight to the counter, looking her in the eye as he slid into a seat. "I'll take a coffee," he said simply. Brandy's hands shook slightly as she grabbed a mug and poured his drink. When she placed it in front of him, she finally forced herself to speak. "Tyrone, But before she could finish, the diner doors swung open again. A man in a suit stepped inside, followed by two others. They looked out of place in the small-town diner, polished, professional, serious. The leader of the group, a tall man in his 50s, glanced around before locking eyes on Tyrone. "There he is," the man said with a grin. "Tyrone, we've been looking for you." Brandy blinked. She wasn't the only one. The other patrons were watching curiously, sensing something big was about to happen. Tyrone sighed and set his coffee down, shaking his head with a small smile. "You guys just don't quit, do you?" The suited man laughed. "You can't blame us. When word got out that you were in town, we had to track you down." He'd pulled out a business card and slid it across the counter. "My company's been trying to get a meeting with you for weeks. We want you on board." Brandy's breath caught. She looked at the business card, and then at Tyrone, suddenly realizing he wasn't just some tourist. Steve, who had been watching from the kitchen, stepped forward. The suited man smiled. "Tyrone here isn't just any guy. He's a successful investor. He's helped launch businesses across the country, and my company has been hoping to work with him. The realization hit Brandy like a freight train. Tyrone had power, influence. He wasn't just some random guy passing through. He could have ruined her life that day. If he had wanted to, he could have made sure she never worked again. And yet, he didn't. Instead, he had walked away. He had given her the chance to change, even when he didn't have to. Brandy felt a lump rise in her throat as she looked at him. You could have, she trailed off, not even sure how to finish the sentence. Tyrone met her gaze, his face calm. I could have. He agreed. But people like you don't learn from punishment. You learn from understanding. Brandy exhaled shakily, her hands clenched at her sides. I know an apology doesn't fix anything, she said quietly. But I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Tyrone studied her for a long moment, then finally he nodded. It's not about the apology, it's about what you do next. Brandy swallowed hard. I know. Tyrone glanced down at the business card on the counter and smirked. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to enjoy my coffee before I deal with these guys. Brandy let out a small, nervous laugh, and for the first time in months, it wasn't forced. She didn't know if she'd ever be able to erase her past mistakes. But as she walked back to the coffee pot, refilling his cup, she realized something had changed. Months after Tyrone's confrontation, Brandy had worked hard to change. The diner had seen a shift, with new staff and customers noticing the change in her attitude. She had become more open, more aware of her actions, and even began participating in local community events aimed at racial equality. Brandy thought that her past mistakes were behind her, that she had learned and grown. But one afternoon, a new test arose. One that would force her to decide if the lessons she learned had truly stuck. It was a busy lunch rush at the diner, and the place was filled with the usual customers. Brandy was moving from table to table, delivering food, refilling drinks, and trying to keep the flow of business steady. That's when it happened. A man, clearly annoyed, raised his voice as he stared at the menu. Why is this place full of people who don't belong here? Brandy stopped in her tracks, a chill running down her spine. She looked around the room. The man, sitting alone at the counter, was staring directly at the young black waitress who had just started working there. Her hands were shaking slightly as she served him, the discomfort written across her face. The other patrons were trying to ignore the situation, pretending they hadn't heard the comment. But Brandy heard it loud and clear. The man continued, louder now. This is why we're losing our town. We have all these outsiders, and they don't even belong. I'm just sick of it. Brandy felt the room grow heavier. The air was thick with tension. The young waitress who had been serving him barely made eye contact, her face flushing in embarrassment and fear. Brandy looked around. No one said anything. The room was silent. She froze. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the weight of the moment pressing on her. This was it. She glanced at the young waitress, who was now shaking slightly, unable to meet the man's eyes. She couldn't keep looking away. Not this time. Brandy stepped forward, her voice steady but clear. Excuse me, she said, her eyes never leaving the man's. You need to leave. The diner went still. The man blinked in surprise, clearly caught off guard by her sudden confidence. What? He laughed, but it was a hollow laugh, one full of arrogance. Are you telling me to leave? Yes. Brandy stood tall, her voice firmer now, despite the fluttering anxiety in her stomach. You're not welcome here. Not with that attitude. You can leave now, or I'll call security. The man's smile faded. He looked around at the other patrons, but no one spoke up in his defense. Slowly he stood up, his face reddening with fury. You've got no right to talk to me like that, he snarled, before turning to leave. But before he reached the door, the young waitress who had been serving him looked up and spoke in a quiet but steady voice. Thank you. The man didn't say anything else as he stormed out of the diner, slamming the door behind him. The moment he left, a wave of relief swept over the room. The patrons slowly began to talk again, some nodding in Brandy's direction, others offering small but meaningful glances of support. The young waitress, still nervous, walked over to Brandy. She hesitated for a moment, then extended her hand. "Thank you," she said again, this time with more confidence in her voice. "I don't know if I could have said anything." Brandy smiled gently, squeezing her hand. "You don't have to, not as long as I'm here." For the first time in a long while, Brandy felt proud of herself, not just because she had stood up in the moment, but because she had finally become the person she always wished she could be. She knew that it wasn't enough to just apologize for past mistakes. She had to act, and today she had. Few hours later, Brandy was called to the manager's office. Immediately she picked the call from the intercom and was told to report to the office. Her stomach sank. Panic-stricken, she might be laid off or disciplined for asking a customer out of the restaurant. She already prepared for the worst, but consoled herself with the fact that she did the right thing. The top office wasn't just a place anyone enters. It's either you're getting hired, fired, or promoted before you can be summoned there. She entered the office, the lush of colors beautifully displayed. Graffiti and murals decorated the walls. Cushions and magazines were placed at the receiving area. A water dispenser and coffee maker to the right. Mr. Brown's secretary had the loveliest roses and lilies decorated everywhere. The potted plants made the place look exquisite and added to the lush of colors. The secretary came out, a woman in her mid-30s, smiling at her as she gestured for her to step into the main office. "Mr. Brown will see you now." Brandy got up, straightened her dress, hands fidgeting, as she walked into the office. "Brandy," Mr. Brown said with an air of calmliness. His demeanor made Brandy more relaxed and eased the tension. What if he was trying to calmly lay her off work? She dismissed the idea as soon as it came. "Have your sit, Brandy," and she did, arms folded slightly on her laps, waiting to hear what Mr. Brown had to say. "Well, what you did today was quite surprising, and a bold step to take." Brandy was about to start explaining herself when Mr. Brown held his hand up to indicate he doesn't want an explanation. "You know, we treat our customers with respect, as they're the reason we're thriving in the first place. I should have called you a long time ago, especially with what happened between you and Mr. Tyrone. But thankfully, the heat of the media didn't portray the restaurant in a bad light. Aside from that, I had so many engagements and trips, and I wanted to address you personally, so I told your supervisors not to say anything. Your reaction towards a customer today was also brought to my attention. I had earlier messaged Mr. Tyrone when the incident happened, and he suggested I observe you, and if there's visible change, I shouldn't lay you off work. And with what just happened, I can say you've learnt your lesson. Therefore, I have decided to promote you, to encourage good behavior amongst other staff, and to show them there's always room for positive change. The reputation of this restaurant rests on the relationship you possess with our customers. I don't want bias of any sort. This place is open to all, and discriminatory or segregational behavior can't be condoned here. With that being said, meet my secretary to hand over your promotion later. You'll be in charge of supervising the new staff, orienting them on the kind of behavior that's acceptable here, amongst other things. Do you have any objections? None, sir, Brandy replied, still surprised by this turn of events. Thank you so much, sir. I won't disappoint you. Mr. Brown nodded and returned to the paperwork lying on his table. Brandy kept spinning round while making her way to the elevator, a promotion letter clutched tightly to her chest. The rhythmic beat of her heart showed her excitement. She felt she'll erupt with joy. She was bubbling with excitement as she related the news to Steve, who was happy for her. As she closed for the day, she felt the unusual beauty of nature enveloping her. She decided to walk home, paying details to the trees, birds, the hum of birds, and the frenzy from children running about. Hours after she got home, she received a text message. She was shocked to see the sender was Tyrone. "Congratulations on your promotion. Remember I told you it's your actions that matters more than your apology. Well, your actions show how much you've changed. You deserve the promotion, because change isn't always easy, same as admitting you're wrong and doing better. I made sure the manager sees this, because true leaders are teachable. Guess we'll have a little chat when I return back to the country. Keep pushing," from Tyrone. Brandy smiled. To think the same man who could have used his influence to have her fired was the reason she wasn't fired and now was promoted baffled her. She was happy about the opportunity. Not everyone got so lucky. Reclining into her sofa, she played some jazz music, willing to soak in this moment of new beginnings. She brought home some leftover steak, which she microwaved, and ate with some salad. When next she saw Mr. Tyrone, she'll make sure she thanks him for his benevolence.